Once upon a time, before the current OKC team, the Oklahoma City Thunder had everything. Kevin Durant was making a name for himself as one of the greatest scorers the NBA has ever seen. Russell Westbrook was a force in nature, and James Harden was developing into an offensive guru. Combined together, they looked like they'd rule the league for the next decade. But instead, that dynasty never happened. Harden was traded, Durant eventually left, and one of the most talented teams in NBA history became one of basketball's greatest what-ifs. But what's interesting is that this story has already been written, not by an NBA analyst, not by a sports writer, but by a French novelist 180 years earlier. Because the story of Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden has a lot more in common with the Three Musketeers than you might think. Let's get into it. Published in 1844 by Alexandre Dumas, the Three Musketeers followed three legendary friends, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. On the surface, they couldn't be more different. Athos was wise, reserved, and carried the scars of his past. Porthos was loud, proud, and larger than life. Aramis was elegant, intelligent, and constantly torn between loyalty to his friends and his own ambitions. But despite their differences, they formed a brotherhood. They fought together, they won together, and for a time, they seemed inseparable. And relating it back to the original OKC Big Three, it starts to sound pretty familiar in what I'm trying to get at. Because just like the Musketeers, Oklahoma City Stars weren't united because they were the same. They were united because their differences complemented one another. And that's where the comparisons start. Let's start off with James Harden. I believe the Musketeer that represents Harden the most would be Athos. Athos is often considered the true leader of the Musketeers, not because he's the loudest, not because he's the strongest, but because he's the most thoughtful. Athos understands people better than anyone else in the story. And that's why James Harden fits this role perfectly. Harden wasn't the explosive athlete that Westbrook was. He wasn't the superstar scorer that Kevin Durant was becoming. Instead, he was just a strategist. The playmaker, the problem solver, the player who saw the game differently than anybody else. And even when he came off the bench, there was a level of maturity to his game that suggested he could eventually become something much bigger, just like Athos. And when we talk about Russell Westbrook, I'd say the Musketeer that represents him the most would be Porthos. The most energetic Musketeer, the most emotional, the most unapologetically himself. Porthos doesn't enter a room quietly. He makes sure to let everybody know that he's there. And if Athos is Harden, then Porthos is unquestionably Russell Westbrook. Nobody played harder, nobody played louder, nobody embodied pure force of will quite like Russell Westbrook. And most importantly, Porthos is fiercely loyal, and among Oklahoma City stars, nobody represented loyalty more than Russell Westbrook. While the other two stars eventually left, Westbrook became synonymous with the city himself. And even to this day, Oklahoma City still represents Russell Westbrook. But now let's talk about Kevin Durant, and the Musketeer that represents Kevin Durant the most would be Aramis. Because Kevin Durant isn't an Athos, and he's definitely not a Porthos. Durant is an Aramis. Aramis is brilliant, refined, ambitious. And throughout the novel, Aramis repeatedly finds himself caught between two worlds. One world is his loyalty to his Musketeers, and the other is the possibility of becoming something greater. That's what made Kevin Durant so fascinating in Oklahoma City. He loved his teammates. He loved competing alongside them. But as his career progressed, another possibility emerged. What if there was a better path? What if there was a better opportunity? What if greatness existed somewhere else? And eventually, just like Aramis, personal ambition won. Here's what makes the Thunder and the Musketeers so similar. Neither group failed because they lacked talent. Neither group failed because they lacked chemistry. Neither group failed because they lacked loyalty. They failed because each person ultimately wanted something different. James Harden wanted his own team. Westbrook wanted to compete beside the franchise that drafted him. Durant wanted a different path to a championship. None of those desires were necessarily wrong, but they weren't compatible whatsoever. So, most people remember the Oklahoma City Thunder as a failed dynasty. A team that should have won championships. A team that broke apart way too soon. And maybe all that's true. But maybe their story wasn't really about basketball. Maybe it was about something much older. A story about friendship, ambition, loyalty. And the reality that even the strongest brotherhoods don't always last forever. Athos, Porthos, Aramis. James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant. Different centuries, different worlds, but somehow the exact same story. That's going to be all for the video. You guys can let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, what you think. I actually got inspired to make this video from another video that I'd probably link the dude's channel down below in the description. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next time.